Welcome back everybody, my name is Tucker, and today's a video that I've wanted to do for a long time, and I finally got around to doing it this week, and that is a list of the worst NBA general managers of all time. In this video, I'm going to be taking a look at some front office members that for any number of reasons, whether it be poor draft choices or bad trades or handing out awful contracts, have cemented themselves as some of the worst ever to hold that title. Really quickly, just so you know, this list isn't in any kind of order, and as always with these kinds of things, people are going to have any number of opinions. So if you think that there should have been someone on this list that isn't, be sure to leave that down in the comment section below. Secondly, I'm expanding the role of GM to include any number of titles such as the head of basketball operations or team president. Basically, these guys were the ones calling the shots in the front office, even if they didn't technically have the title of general manager. With all that said, let's get started. Number 1, David Kahn, Minnesota Timberwolves. David Kahn was hired by the Timberwolves in May of 2009 to replace a different, not so successful GM at the time, Kevin McHale. But the team ended up with the worst record in the league during his tenure, and he lasted less than 4 years on the job. In his very first draft in 2009, he made the unfortunately awful first impression of drafting 3 point guards in the first round and 2 in the top 10. Those being Ricky Rubio at 5, Johnny Flynn at 6, and Ty Lawson at 18, who was later traded to the Nuggets. Flynn had a strong rookie year but completely fell off and was on a different team 2 years after being drafted and was out of the league completely, just 4 years after being a top 6 pick. Rubio held a good amount of promise in the beginning of his career and is still a very productive player, but to have 2 top 6 picks in your first draft as the head of the front office and get 0 All-Star appearances out of either of them isn't ideal. Made even worse by the fact that the greatest shooter of all time was selected just 1 pick later, and 2 other All-Star guards were selected in the top 17. Kahn's draft woes continued into the 2010 draft when he selected Wesley Johnson out of Syracuse with the 4th overall pick, 1 ahead of DeMarcus Cousins, and in the same top 10 as eventual All-Stars Gordon Hayward and Paul George. Johnson got off to an awful start, lasted only 2 years with the team, and has never been anything but a fringe role player in his time in the league. And that brings us to the 2011 NBA draft. With the 2nd overall pick, he selected Derek Williams out of Arizona in what was admittedly a weird draft class where the best players were picked later in the draft. Kahn missed on Kemba Walker, Klay Thompson, Kawhi Leonard, and way later on, Jimmy Butler. For a guy that, big surprise, lasted 2 full seasons with the team and bounced around the league for 6 teams in 6 years, and now finds himself out of the league completely. Along with those draft errors, Kahn screwed up rookie extension talks with their best player at the time, Kevin Love, and allowed him to hit free agency 2 years earlier than he should have, which gave him the leverage to push his way out of Minnesota and over to Cleveland via trade. Obviously, hindsight is 20/20 here, but in addition to messing up the Kevin Love situation, Kahn missed out on a great player at every single position in the 3 drafts he was with the Timberwolves with the 4 top 6 picks they had, all of which makes him potentially the worst NBA GM of all time. Number 2, Michael Jordan, Charlotte Bobcats/Hornets. In June of 2006, Michael Jordan purchased a minority stake in the at the time Charlotte Bobcats, with part of the deal being that he would take over full control of the basketball decisions being made by the franchise under the title Managing Member of Basketball Operations. He became the majority owner of the team in 2010, and that's likely the only reason that he's still in charge of basketball decisions for the team. The only active member of this list, because if he wasn't his own boss, he very likely would have been fired by now. The blunders made by Jordan have primarily come on draft night, where the Hornets have held the rights to 11 lottery picks from 2006 through 2018 and have landed exactly 1 player that's become an all-star to this point, Kemba Walker. 7 of those were in the top 10 and 3 of them were in the top 5. Including busts such as Adam Morrison in 2006, a draft night trade to pick up 7th pick Bismack Biyombo in 2011, and more recent not quite busts like Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, Cody Zeller, and Frank Kaminsky. MJ, despite all his greatness as a player, has consistently shown an inability to bring big-time talent to Charlotte, with the exception of Walker, despite plenty of chances to do so. Even though he is the owner and in full charge of the basketball side of things, as I said earlier, there are obviously other people involved in the decision-making process, as is the case with every member of this list. For example, the team just hired former Lakers front office member Mitch Kupchak as their GM this offseason. But whenever a franchise has gone to the playoffs just 3 times in 12 seasons and haven't won a single playoff series in that time as they have during Jordan's tenure, you wouldn't expect the person in charge to be there for much longer, which, as I said earlier, only hasn't happened because Jordan is in fact his own boss. Number 3, Billy King, Brooklyn Nets and Philadelphia 76ers. Though Billy King did have a somewhat mixed reputation from his time as Sixers GM from 1998 to 2007, the primary negative being a habit for handing out unjustified big deals to middling players, most notably a 7-year $50 million contract for Kenny Thomas and a 6-year $63 million contract for Samuel Dalembert, his worst work by far came in his time with the New Jersey/Brooklyn Nets. I've already detailed this time period very specifically in a different video, so this is going to be a rather brief version in comparison. After an initial offseason of spending big on some not-so-great players, King went on to trade for Deron Williams in 2011, sending Derek Favors, Devin Harris, and 2 first-round picks to Utah. Then, near the end of the 2011-12 season, King made what I believe to be one of the worst trades in NBA history, sending a top 3 protected pick to the Trailblazers for Gerald Wallace, who was a free agent in the upcoming offseason, when the Nets had a 14-29 record at the time of the trade. It honestly doesn't even make any sense to say it out loud that a man hired to run an NBA franchise traded away a potential high lottery pick, despite the protections, for an upcoming free agent that had struggled with injuries in recent years. In an interview, King rationalized the move by saying that the team only really liked the top 3 prospects in the upcoming draft, so anything beyond that wouldn't have been as valuable to them. Well, that pick ended up being number 6 overall, and the Trailblazers used it to draft Damian Lillard, while King was left to sign Gerald Wallace to a 4-year, $40 million deal in the 2012 offseason. And now we get to the really awful part. King was in win-now mode with team owner Mikhail Prokhorov breathing down his neck to put a contending team on the floor, so he swung a deal in July of 2013 with the Boston Celtics to bring in Paul Pierce, Kevin Garnett, and Jason Terry for 3 future unprotected first-round picks and an additional pick swap, plus some other filler players and assets on both sides. The new Nets core never really came together, and Williams' career completely fell off a cliff, so those unprotected picks ended up being James Young in 2014, Jaylen Brown in 2016, the pick swap in 2017 became Jason Tatum, and the 2018 pick became Colin Sexton, which the Celtics used to bring in Kyrie Irving. So basically, a large part of the foundation of the current Boston roster was more or less gifted to them by the moronic moves made by Billy King. He's firmly on this list of one of the worst GMs of all time, and there really isn't an argument otherwise. Number 4, Isiah Thomas, New York Knicks. Next up is Detroit Pistons all-time great Isiah Thomas, who was the president of the New York Knicks from 2003 to 2008, although that wasn't the only job title he held during that time, which I'll get to later. Andy Hoops put together an awesome in-depth look at Thomas's tenure in New York, labeling him as potentially the worst NBA GM of all time, so you should definitely check that out. Thomas first traded for guard Stephon Marbury in an effort to get the team much-needed star power, but he consistently butted heads with coaches and players and was never really a positive force on the team. He then signed center Jerome James to a 5-year, $30 million deal, a player with modest averages that certainly didn't deserve that kind of money. Keep in mind that that was pretty big money at the time. He followed that by trading for big man Eddie Curry from the Bulls, adding another potential locker room issue to the team in exchange for, among other assets, the picks that became LaMarcus Aldridge and Joakim Noah. And then just to wrap it all up, he traded away a young Trevor Ariza for an old and unproductive Steve Francis, named himself the coach in 2006, just a year after signing Larry Brown to a huge contract to fulfill the same position, signed a young Jared Jeffries to a 5-year, $30 million contract, who performed much worse in New York than he did prior to becoming a Knick, and then traded for Zach Randolph, who at the time was yet another big issue in the locker room for a Knicks team that didn't need any more trouble in that department. I do think that it's important to point out that Thomas was the executive vice president of the Toronto Raptors from 1994 to 1998, a 4-year period that saw the team draft Damon Stoudemire, Marcus Camby, and Tracy McGrady, which does put some rare positives on his front office resume. But his time with the Knicks, without even mentioning the off-the-court issues that he brought to the franchise himself, directly coincides with one of the bleakest periods and worst records in team history, and essentially set them up for years and years of mediocrity that they've only occasionally been able to climb out of this century. And there you have it, the 4 worst NBA GMs of all time, in my opinion. Now, as I said in the intro, anytime you're dealing with these kinds of lists, there are bound to be a variety of opinions, especially when there have been so many people that have held the title of NBA GM. So if you don't agree with a member of this list, or you think there are other guys that should have made the cut, that's fine. I'm always interested to hear y'all's thoughts in the comment section. Having said that, once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.